History is filled with battles decided by strategy, fate, or raw courage. But once in a generation, a single night rewrites everything we think we know about power. Tonight's story is one of those rare moments. It is the tale of a prince shaped by captivity, a sultan forged in conquest, and a confrontation so unlikely that chroniclers hesitated to believe it. Yet it happened in fire, darkness, and terror. And as you watch, you'll discover how a forgotten corner of Europe produced one of medieval warfare's greatest shocks, and why even the conqueror of Constantinople turned his horse and fled. 30,000 men brought ruin upon an army 5 times their size. A single charge from a handful of horsemen shattered what was considered the most formidable fighting force on earth. And one prince, armed not with numbers, but with an understanding of fear itself, forced the greatest conqueror of his age into retreat. This is no legend or embellished tale. This is the knight Vlad III, known to history as Vlad the Impaler, met the Ottoman Empire at Târgoviște in 1462. Imagine it, 7,000 riders exploding out of the darkness, hurling themselves into a sprawling camp of nearly 150,000 Ottoman soldiers. That June night, the future of Christian Europe trembled on the edge of a blade. By the end of this video, you'll see exactly how one of the most improbable victories in medieval history unfolded, why the man who captured Constantinople turned from a mere regional prince, and the horrifying price that came with that victory. 3 revelations shaped this outcome. The reconnaissance mission that made the impossible feasible, the nightmare vision that broke an army said to be unbreakable, and the intimate bond of hatred between 2 men, hunter and hunted, that determined everything. Most commanders would collapse under 5-1 odds. The Ottoman Empire had crushed empires that stood on firmer ground. Sultan Mehmed II, the same ruler who breached Constantinople's ancient walls only 9 years earlier, marched with elite janissaries, vast cannon trains, and endless reinforcements. His armies had never suffered true defeat. Against this colossus stood Vlad III of Wallachia, 30,000 men, many of them peasants and minor nobles, defending a principality smaller than a modern American state. No one expected resistance. But here is where the story veers into the unbelievable. Vlad had once lived inside the Ottoman world. As a hostage in Mehmed's court, he learned their language, their rhythms, their weaknesses. He absorbed everything: guard routines, military habits, psychological pressure points. What the Sultan never realized was that he was marching against a man who understood Ottoman thinking better than many of Mehmed's own commanders. To grasp how this victory was forged, we must return to where the hatred took root. The boy who would become Vlad the Impaler spent 4 formative years inside the empire he would later terrorize. From ages 11 to 15, he lived not as a guest, but as political collateral, ensuring his father's loyalty. His younger brother Radu adapted easily, charming their captors. Vlad did not. He watched. He studied. He endured humiliation and pain, storing every slight like coals waiting for air. Those years would become the foundation of his future war. But the spark that made conflict inevitable came decades later. In 1459, Ottoman envoys arrived demanding 10,000 ducats in tribute and 500 boys for the Janissary Corps. Vlad welcomed them graciously until they refused to remove their turbans, citing custom. Vlad smiled and answered, "Then let us help secure them permanently." His soldiers nailed the turbans to the envoys' skulls. The screams echoed across Târgoviște. The message was unmistakable. Wallachia would not kneel. What seemed like monstrous cruelty had purpose. Vlad had observed in the Ottoman court that terror, when used correctly, magnified force. Fear could move armies more effectively than steel. And Mehmed II was no ordinary ruler. At 29, he commanded the world's most feared military machine. Constantinople had fallen to him, a feat many believed impossible. Wallachia, in his eyes, was little more than a minor irritation, a rebellious pebble on his road to European expansion. He intended to grind it beneath his heel. But then strange reports reached him. Ottoman border patrols vanished. Whole units disappeared overnight. Vlad claimed to have killed 23,884 Turks and collaborators, not estimated, counted. Bodies were found in beds, on battlements, inside fortified posts. The Impaler struck everywhere and nowhere, leaving terror rather than armies behind. Wallachia had a population of barely 500,000. The Ottomans ruled over millions across Anatolia and the Balkans. By every logical measure, this should have been a brief campaign. But Vlad wasn't following logic. He was writing a new manual, one built entirely on psychological warfare. In the spring of 1462, Mehmed prepared to end the defiance personally. What crossed the Danube that year was not simply an army, but a moving empire. Conservative estimates count 100,000 soldiers. Some chroniclers claim 150,000 or more. 120 great cannons, the same kind that thundered against Constantinople, rolled north. Wagon trains stretched to the horizon. The Janissaries stood at the core, elite warriors raised from childhood, fearless and disciplined. Around them gathered Sipahi cavalry, irregulars, and allied forces. Mehmed rode at the head, determined to erase Wallachia from the map. But Vlad's years in Ottoman captivity revealed a weakness. Even the strongest army becomes fragile when its routines fracture. Vlad commanded perhaps 30,000, peasants with makeshift weapons, local boyars protecting their lands, and mercenaries hired with promises instead of coin. No great cannons, no fortresses, only desperation, terrain knowledge, and a leader who understood fear better than any general in Europe. He exploited one truth he had learned. Huge armies required huge supplies. So he gave the order that would turn Wallachia into a nightmare. Burn everything. Granaries, wells, livestock, villages. The land became barren and poisoned. Vlad wasn't just starving the Ottomans, he was unsettling them. What kind of enemy destroys his own homeland just to wound an invader? Then came the most chilling tactic. Knowing Ottoman camp hygiene, Vlad sent disguised plague carriers into the ranks. Peasants infected with disease, dressed as Ottoman soldiers, speaking perfect Turkish. Within days, dysentery and fever began to spread. Veteran troops had marched from Belgrade to Baghdad. Hardship didn't frighten them. But this was different. Rather than slowing, Mehmed accelerated the march, determined to crush Wallachia through speed alone. Yet Vlad's scouts, former hostages fluent in Turkish, shadowed every movement, counting tents, charting guard patterns, memorizing nightly routines. And in that shadowed landscape, Vlad planned something that defied every rule of warfare, a direct assault on an army 5 times larger. The Ottomans soon learned what kind of war they had entered. Villages lay empty, wells polluted, doors swung open in silent warning. On a church door, a message in Turkish read, "Welcome to our land. Leave while you still can." By the 3rd day, the pattern held. Hunger grew. Thirst deepened. Soldiers whispered, "Where are the Wallachians? Why did no one resist?" Then the darkness answered. Arrows flew from unseen ridges. Patrols vanished. Horses shrieked as they plunged into hidden pits. By dawn, dozens were missing, but not a single Wallachian body lay among them. Only abandoned weapons and the creeping fear that the enemy was everywhere and nowhere. And this was only the beginning. The plague carriers had done their work far better than anyone imagined. By the end of that first brutal week, thousands of Ottoman soldiers were doubled over in misery, clutching their stomachs as fever swept relentlessly through the ranks. The medical corps, drowning in casualties, could not trace the source. Was it tainted wells? Spoiled meat? Or had they stepped into something far darker than ordinary misfortune? Imagine preparing to strike a camp of 150,000 men, while knowing disease and dread had already softened its core. A recovered diary from an Ottoman foot soldier, we'll call him Yusuf, recorded the despair. "The very soil fights us. My brother died of swamp fever. Ahmed fell to an arrow fired from the night itself. We face no Christian army, yet death stalks us every hour. Surely the infidels have bargained with demons." Historians still marvel at what came next. Vlad's intelligence network was astonishingly sophisticated for its time, composed of escaped janissaries, Ottoman-born Christians, and Wallachians who had lived for years inside Turkish territories. They drifted through the colossal Ottoman encampment like phantoms, noting everything: guard rotations, password shifts, powder storage, cavalry feed stations, and, most importantly, the exact location of Mehmed's command pavilion. Nothing about these assaults was random. Every strike served a cold purpose: blow up gunpowder wagons to stir panic, eliminate officers to fracture command structure, poison horse feed to cripple the cavalry. Vlad wasn't trying to win through these raids alone. He was shaping the battlefield for something unprecedented. Then, in a move that stunned both allies and enemies, Vlad sent a message to Mehmed on June 14th. The challenge was simple: meet me in fair combat near Târgoviște. Let honor decide the outcome. Ottoman generals roared with laughter. Did this petty prince truly believe 30,000 farmers and minor nobles could stand against the might of the Sultan's legions? Mehmed dismissed the challenge as an obvious trap, but he welcomed it. If Vlad wished to choose the ground of his burial, so be it. But what followed shattered every rule of warfare. On June 16th, only 2 days from Târgoviște, the Ottoman army settled into a vast night camp. Vlad made his decision. He could not wait for the Ottomans to enter his chosen killing field. His raids had inflicted pain, but not enough. He needed a blow so savage, so precise, that would turn Ottoman strength into its own downfall. The empire was about to learn what happens when you teach war to a man who never forgets. Vlad gathered his boyar cavalry, 7,000 riders who knew perfectly well they were charging toward their likely deaths. But their prince carried a plan sharpened by intelligence, so meticulous and daring that it skirted madness. During his years of captivity, Vlad had memorized an Ottoman secret that no ordinary commander would ever discover: a fatal vulnerability in their night protocols. More shocking still, he intended to confirm every detail personally. That night, he committed what seemed an act of pure lunacy. He infiltrated Mehmed's camp himself. Picture it: a prince walking calmly into an ocean of 150,000 enemies, wearing the robes of a Turkish merchant, speaking flawless Ottoman Turkish, accompanied by 6 scouts who could pass as natives. Their forged permits fooled the tired guards with ease. After all, who would willingly enter the realm of certain death? Inside, Vlad's eyes absorbed everything. The janissary quarters distinguished by their soaring tents, powder wagons sorted meticulously, herd lines, walkways between the tent clusters, and rising over all, Mehmed's grand pavilion adorned with 3 golden crescents. Vlad counted guard intervals, memorized routes, and studied the rotation of the elite guards. Then he discovered the key that changed everything. The Ottoman password system followed predictable patterns. Each sector used a different code word, but their responses followed a structure, and in a chaotic night environment, recognition depended more on voice and language than on faces. Speak Turkish perfectly, give the correct response, and one could wander freely through the chaos. Mehmed had no idea that Vlad had just solved the riddle of attacking a force 5 times his size. The empire's greatest strength, its scale, would become its undoing once darkness erased distinction. Returning to his men, Vlad gathered his 7,000 cavalry. These were not merely soldiers, but men who had lost wives, sons, fathers to Ottoman raids. A priest blessed them, fully aware many would not see sunrise. Then Vlad revealed the brilliance of his plan. There would be no blind charge. Instead, each unit of 500 would strike different camp sectors simultaneously, guided by sketches drawn from Vlad's reconnaissance. Their objective was not to crush the Ottomans, but to force the Ottomans to crush themselves. Midnight approached with a moonless, starless sky, the ideal cloak. The horsemen wrapped their mounts' hooves in cloth to silence their approach and darkened their armor to hide reflections. Infiltrators moved first, gliding through the outer ring using the passwords Vlad had gathered. They set delayed fuses at powder wagons, cut tethers in the horse lines, loosened tent stakes, and planted caltrops in escape lanes. Then, at precisely 1 a.m., 7,000 horses erupted from 7 directions. The perimeter guards never understood they were dying. Bolts found throats in darkness. The Wallachians smashed through the outer layer like storm waves breaching a seawall. And then the night was torn open. The powder wagons detonated. Firestorms erupted skyward, drowning the moonless night in a brief, blazing apocalypse before plunging everyone back into deeper blackness. Ottoman soldiers, half-dressed and disoriented, stumbled directly into Wallachian lances. But here was the masterstroke. The attackers screamed in Turkish. The Christians attack the east sector. Protect the Sultan. Form ranks at the supply depot. In the darkness, with stolen Ottoman gear and identical accents, soldiers hesitated. When they hesitated, they died. Janissaries barreling toward the pavilion collided with Sepahi cavalry who had heard different orders. Confusion transformed into slaughter as Ottomans hacked down their own comrades, believing them disguised invaders. Tents collapsed, trapping men inside. Horses broke loose and stampeded. The camp fell into complete pandemonium, a labyrinth of fire, steel, and terror. Vlad had turned the largest army in the world into a weapon against itself. Then came the final act. Vlad led a wedge of 200 elite riders toward the Sultan's pavilion. If Mehmed died, the invasion ended that night. Guided by the layout he'd memorized, Vlad cut through defenders until the golden crescents loomed overhead. His lance struck the first guard. His sword dropped the second. The cavalry stormed the pavilion, but Mehmed was not there. Instead, his Grand Vizier stumbled inside, reaching for a blade. The Sultan had quietly shifted tents, a habit from years campaigning. The genius of the attack slammed against the brick wall of bad luck. Janissaries finally rallied. Their discipline, unshaken by panic, converged like steel jaws around the pavilion. Vlad had only moments to avoid annihilation. He signaled a retreat. Trumpets sounded through the inferno. The Wallachian cavalry melted into the night as fast as they had appeared, leaving behind devastation that defied comprehension. When dawn broke, the scene resembled the aftermath of a natural disaster. 15,000 Ottomans lay dead, some slain by Wallachians, many by their own comrades in the chaos. Hundreds of wagons lay in ashes. The medical corps, already strained by disease, faced an impossible tide of wounded. Mehmed lived, shaken, furious, humiliated but alive. Worse news followed. Dozens of veteran officers lay among the dead, men invaluable to the structure of such a massive army. Military scholars still debate how a mere 3 hours produced such carnage. The answer lies in Vlad's mastery of psychological warfare. He had twisted Ottoman strengths into vulnerabilities. Their vast numbers became chaos. Their discipline turned into friendly fire. Their certainty of victory became the crack through which terror seeped. But Mehmed's reaction stunned even his closest advisors. He did not retreat. He ordered an immediate march toward Târgoviște. Vlad had wounded him, but the Sultan still commanded an army that dwarfed Wallachia. A conventional battle, he believed, would settle the matter swiftly. Yet Vlad was not finished. The night attack was never meant to win the war. It was designed to prepare the Ottomans, prepare them for something so psychologically horrifying that even the conqueror of Constantinople would falter. Everything, the raids, the poisoned land, the night assault, had one purpose: to bring the Ottoman army to the brink of despair. As dawn lifted over the devastated camp and Vlad's riders vanished into the forests, the full scale of the disaster came into view. 15,000 Ottomans lay dead, but this was merely the prelude. What followed would eclipse even the horrors of the night attack. The march toward Târgoviște became something closer to a funeral procession than a military advance. Exhausted soldiers stumbled across scorched, hostile terrain. No rest, no order, no mercy. Mehmed whipped the army forward, knowing hesitation meant doom. If he paused long enough for Vlad to regroup or to devise another nightmare, the army might collapse under the weight of its own dread. But what awaited them would break even his iron resolve. June 17th brought the first unsettling sign. Scouts galloped back with reports of strange silhouettes rising on the horizon. Too tall, too regular, too unnatural to be trees. As the columns crested the final ridge overlooking Târgoviște, the front ranks halted so abruptly that those behind crashed into them. Veterans who had stormed cities from Belgrade to Baghdad simply stood, silent and petrified. Some dropped to their knees. Others retched where they stood. Stretching across the plain was not a forest, but a forest made of men. 20,000 stakes rose from the soil in impossible symmetry, and on each one, the dead hung grotesquely in the sweltering summer heat. The stench hit them like a physical blow, rot blood, heat, and millions of flies droning in a maddening chorus, as though the earth itself groaned under the weight of death. And then the details became clear. These bodies were not chosen at random. Vlad had arranged them deliberately, by uniform, by rank, by status. Here was a cavalry officer who'd vanished on patrol. There, a bureaucrat who disappeared months ago along the border. The pattern intensified toward the center, forming a macabre amphitheater. And atop the tallest stake, raised with special care, was the figure that shattered the Ottoman high command. Hamza Pasha, Mehmed's trusted general, his friend, still wearing polished armor, beard carefully arranged, preserved for this one moment. He stared down at the approaching army with lifeless eyes, as though bearing witness to their terror. Imagine what those soldiers saw. Brutality, yes, but also impossible discipline. Every stake had taken hours to sharpen and plant. Every body had been arranged with chilling precision. This was not chaos. This was orchestration. Artistry twisted into horror. Vlad was communicating in the clearest language a conqueror could understand. This is your future. Turn back or join them. Mehmed rode forward, his expression unreadable. Accounts differ on what he whispered, but all agree on the meaning. A man who can do this to his enemies and to his own land is a man one does not conquer. One avoids. The conqueror of Constantinople, undefeated in war, stared at Vlad's forest and realized a truth no battlefield had ever taught him. Some victories demand a price even empires cannot bear. Cracks spread through the army like fractures in glass. Whispers swept the ranks. Would they join the impaled? Soldiers edged backward. Even hardened janissaries muttered prayers. 20,000 bodies, arranged with an intelligence more terrifying than any sword stroke, carved their message into every trembling mind. Then came the sound that completed the unraveling. From Târgoviște's walls drifted the voices of children, an Orthodox choir singing gentle hymns. The contrast between innocent song and the monstrous graveyard before them shattered morale completely. Vlad had orchestrated even this moment, understanding how fragile minds, already stretched to breaking, would respond. What happened next remains one of the most astonishing decisions in military history. Mehmed II, the man whose victories reshaped continents, ordered a retreat. Not a tactical withdrawal, not a strategic repositioning. A full, unambiguous retreat. His official statement: I cannot take the land from a man who wages war like this. Let him keep his throne. Witnesses swore his eyes never left Hamza Pasha's impaled corpse. The withdrawal began with discipline, but dissolved into panic. Soldiers abandoned wagons, horses, even weapons. Every shadow seemed to hide Wallachian devils. The mighty army that had marched into Wallachia as unstoppable conquerors limped away as haunted survivors. But Vlad was not done. The forest of the dead concealed one more message. The bodies were arranged not only by rank, but by ethnicity. Turks in one section, Bulgarians in another, Serbs farther still. Vlad demonstrated intimate knowledge of Mehmed's army. Who served, where they came from, what would torment them most. This was not madness. This was precision. This was psychological warfare raised to the level of architecture. As the Ottomans staggered home, more horrors awaited them. Stragglers, scouts, anyone who lagged behind found themselves added to fresh stakes along the route. Vlad's remaining 6,000 cavalry harassed them relentlessly, striking at night, disappearing by dawn. The killing did not end at Târgoviște. In war, perception can be deadlier than steel. Vlad had constructed the perfect fortress, not with stone, but with fear. Every surviving Ottoman would carry the memory, spreading it across the empire. The forest of stakes became a myth before the last corpse rotted. And from this myth grew something unexpected. The seeds of the Dracula legend were planted not in supernatural tales, but in the very real genius of a man who understood fear at its deepest level. The truth surpassed the fiction it later inspired. Vlad Dracula did not require fangs or sorcery. His mind was his most lethal weapon. None of those 20,000 corpses were random. Each was a message, carefully chosen, carefully positioned. What broke Mehmed was not simply the brutality, it was the intelligence behind it. When giants wage war, the earth remembers. Wallachia remembered in stakes and screams. 30,000 had indeed overcome 150,000, not through the sword alone, but by understanding that terror, wielded with precision, becomes an empire-breaking force. Vlad learned in Ottoman captivity that empires survive on confidence. Destroy that confidence, make victory psychologically unbearable, and even the greatest conqueror will turn away. History pivoted on one missed tent in the darkness when Vlad struck the wrong pavilion. Paradoxically, that failure ensured his triumph. Kill Mehmed, and another Sultan rises. Traumatize Mehmed, and the entire empire hesitates for generations. In the end, Mehmed discovered a truth every conqueror fears. There are some men you do not defeat. You step around them, you whisper their names, and you remember them in the nightmares of empires.